The gathering of the council. The Galactic Council was no place for weakness. It was carved into the heart of a hollowed star, a citadel of light and shadow where the rulers of 1,000 civilizations gathered. They were the architects of order, the arbiters of fate, the ones who decided which species rose into galactic prominence, and which were quietly erased from the annals of history. They had seen empires rise and fall. They had watched stars burn out and galaxies collapse. To them, life was not sacred. It was a resource, weighed and measured against utility. When word came that a human refugee ship had limped into orbit, scorched and broken, the council barely took notice. Humanity was young, fragile, unremarkable. Yet, as custom demanded, a single representative was granted the right to speak before judgment. He was no warrior, no scientist, no politician. He was simply a storyteller, dressed in worn garments, carrying no weapon but his words. The chamber filled with derision. The Vectar generals whispered of conquest. The crystalline Kayla scoffed, their voices like shards of breaking glass. The insectoid core clicked and hissed, impatient for this waste of time to end. The human raised his head, looked upon the gathered might of the galaxy, and began to speak, not of war, not of power, but of stories. The story of fire and ash. He spoke first of Earth's scars. He told of fires that swept across continents, of floods that drowned cities, of wars so bloody they threatened to erase entire generations. He painted vivid images of mushroom clouds rising like fall suns, of children playing the ashes of cities, of humanity clawing its way back from the brink again and again. From fire, he said, we rebuilt. From ash, we rose. The words rippled through the chamber like a current. The insectoid core, bred for efficiency and survival, could not comprehend why a species so fragile would persist through such endless cycles of destruction. To them, failure meant extinction. But here was a species that had failed 1,000 times, and yet still endured. The crystalline caliph tilted their fractal heads, the humans' words refracting in their minds like light through glass. They remembered their own lost homeworld, a planet shattered in an ancient war. They had buried that pain long ago. Yet here in the story of Earth, it stirred again. The human's voice did not falter. He spoke of hunger, of cold winters, of plagues that swept through cities. He spoke of the nameless dead who planted crops in ruined fields so that others might eat. He spoke of resilience. And slowly, impossibly, the council grew silent. Tears among the stars. The story changed. Now the humans spoke of love, of bonds unbroken by distance or death. He told of soldiers who threw themselves on grenades to save their comrades, of parents who starved so their children could eat, of strangers who rushed into burning buildings for people they would never know. He told of hope, that fragile, irrational flame that burned in humanity's heart, even when reason said it should go out. In the chamber of the Galactic Council, something extraordinary happened. A Kayla diplomat, her crystalline body sharp and flawless, began to fracture. Light split from her surface as she trembled, a sound like chimes in morning filling the hall. She was crying. A Vectar warlord, a predator who had crushed civilizations beneath his claws, lowered his gaze and clenched his fists, not in rage, but in shame. Even Mkor, whose insect minds knew no concept of grief, began to click in dissonant tones, confused by a stirring they could not name. The human story had awakened something buried. The council, the galaxy's rulers, who had thought themselves beyond feeling, now felt. And they wept the day the galaxy changed. When the human finished, silence blanketed the chamber. No voice dared to break it. The council, once filled with the noise of conquest and calculation, was quiet as a tomb. Then, one by one, the alien leaders rose. Not in defiance, not in mockery, but in reverence. The Vectar warlord bowed his head. The Kayla diplomat shattered a fragment of her own crystal form, a sign of respect and mourning. Even Mkor clicked in harmony, a rare acknowledgement of something greater than themselves. The council did not enslave Earth. They did not strip its resources or bind humanity in chains. Instead, they made a vow. Humanity would be protected, not because of their strength, not because of their weapons, but because of their stories. For in those stories lay a reminder that even in a cold, uncaring universe, warmth could still exist. That day, the galaxy remembered how to feel. That day, when aliens wept at a human story, everything changed. The story that would not die. The human believed his task was over. His voice was hoarse, his body weary, yet he felt something stir within the chamber that he could not explain. The Alien Council, the most powerful assembly in the galaxy, had not spoken a single word after his tale. Only silence, broken by the soft sound of tears. But the story did not end there. In the days that followed, something began to spread. Word of the human story traveled beyond the chamber walls, carried by envoys, transmitted in encrypted signals, whispered in the corridors of starships and colonies. What had been told once was retold 1,000 times, reshaped in alien tongues, carried across species who had forgotten how to feel. The reptilian warlords of the Vector, once known only for conquest, began teaching their hatchlings the tale of the humans who rose from ash. The crystalline Caliph turned the humans' words into music, haunting refrains that echoed in their shining halls, reminding them that grief could coexist with hope. Even the insectoid core, who had no concept of art, began to carve strange patterns into their hive walls, shapes that mirrored the rising sun the human had described. The council itself changed. Laws once written in the cold logic of power began to soften. Conquest slowed. Treaties grew stronger. Species that had once lived in silence found themselves listened to again. And at the center of it all was humanity. Not because they had the greatest armies or the strongest fleets, but because they had given the galaxy something more dangerous than any weapon. They had given it memory. The memory that survival was not enough. That to endure was not the same as to live. That hope, fragile, foolish hope, was the spark that kept civilizations from crumbling into dust. The storyteller was returned to Earth, not as a prisoner, but as an emissary. When he stepped off his worn refugee ship, he carried no crown, no title, only the weight of a galaxy listening. He realized then the truth. Stories are alive. They move, they grow, they survive long after flesh and stone crumble. And his story, the story of fire, ash, love, and hope, would not die. For in the darkest corners of the cosmos, where empires have forgotten how to dream, the sound of weeping aliens carried one truth. Humanity's voice would echo forever. The weight of 1,000 eyes. The human thought his duty was done when he returned to Earth. He expected peace, perhaps obscurity. But he soon discovered that his story had become something far greater than himself. By the time he stepped onto Earth's soil, the galaxy was already watching. Orbital platforms above the planet glowed brighter than ever, alive with ships that had once come as conquerors but now hovered as witnesses. Alien emissaries filled the skies. Some were grotesque and terrible to behold, armored titans of the Vector, insectoid hive princes of the Mkor, crystalline Caliph diplomats who shimmered like stars. But they did not come for war. They came to listen. The human found himself before crowds of beings who could not have been imagined in the old days of Earth. Species that had once looked down on humanity now leaned forward eagerly, waiting for the next story. And so he told them. He told of the Odyssey, of sailors lost to storm and sea who clung to hope. He told of firelit tribes passing down myths of thunder and sky. He told explorers who crossed deserts, of astronauts who braved a void, of rebels who stood against kings and empires. Every word rippled outward. The Caliph began weaving entire crystal symphonies from the rhythm of his tales. The Mkor, for the first time in their history, began to dream. Alien scholars reporting that the hive itself murmured in patterns shaped by the human's words. The Vector, once a race of endless conquests, began inscribing human poetry on the armor of their warriors, not as trophies, but as blessings before battle. The galaxy was changing, but not all welcomed it. There were whispers in the council, whispers of fear. For his stories could move entire civilizations. If a single human's voice could halt wars and stir ancient grief, then perhaps this was power too great for one species to wield. The Dominion remnants, those who thrived on silence, slavery, and obedience, watched with growing unease. To them, stories were dangerous. Hope was dangerous. Humanity was dangerous. And so, plots began to stir. One evening, beneath the auroras of Earth's reborn skies, the human storyteller found himself approached by an alien unlike any he had seen. Cloaked in shadow, its body shifting like smoke. The creature spoke in a voice that slithered across the air. "Do you understand what you've done?" it asked. The human said nothing. "You have broken the silence. You have awakened memories better left buried. Entire empires are trembling. The galaxy remembers things it was meant to forget. Do you think this will end with weeping and peace?" The human's heart pounded, but he did not flinch. "No," he said softly. "It will end with more stories. And stories never end." The creature hissed and vanished into the night, but the warning lingered. The storyteller now knew his path was no longer his own. He carried the weight of 1,000 eyes, the hopes of worlds that had forgotten hope, and the fear of empires that thrived on despair. And somewhere beyond the rim of known space, enemies began to gather, enemies who did not fear fleets or armies, but feared something far more powerful. A single human voice. The war against silence. The warning had been true. It began quietly, whispers in the dark, star systems where transmissions failed, colonies that fell silent without reason. Trade routes were disrupted, archives corrupted, libraries burned. Not by accident, but by intent. Someone was erasing stories. The Dominion remnants had returned. Though their empire lay shattered, they were endured. To smother hope, to chain worlds in silence once more. They had no need of armies of conquest. They had found a weapon far deadlier. They began destroying memory itself. Across the galaxy, histories vanished. Entire civilizations woke to find their chronicles stolen, their myths fractured, their legends erased. Where once stood monuments, there remained only rubble. Songs faded from the tongues of their singers as if stolen from their minds. It was not annihilation of flesh. It was annihilation of meaning. And humanity, the storytellers, had become the prime target. The first strike came against Earth. Orbital satellites carrying humanity's digital archives flickered and died. Libraries on Luna were reduced to dust. Ancient cultural vaults on Mars were breached, their priceless art and literature stripped into nothingness. The council convened in panic. Many called for humanity's exile, arguing that the very presence of human stories endangered them all. Others begged for protection. For without humanity, their own rediscovered emotions might be extinguished again. In the center of it all stood the human storyteller. His voice no longer reached only a council chamber. It reached a galaxy on the edge of despair. From hidden outposts, from refugee fleets, from broken colonies, aliens tuned in to hear him. And he did not falter. "They want silence," he told them. "They fear our stories because stories make us more than survival machines. Stories make us alive. If they burn our voices, we will speak from the ashes. If they bury our songs, we will sing in the dark. If they erase our names, we will carve them again into the stars." The galaxy rallied. The crystalline Caliph encoded human myths into the very structure of their bodies, turning their own forms into living libraries. The insectoid core carved symbols into their hive walls, defined their oppressors by preserving stories in stone. The Vector, whose claws had once raised worlds, now carried tablets etched with human poetry into battle as banners. This was no longer just humanity's fight. It was the galaxy's first war for memory. The Dominion struck harder. They unleashed the silence engines, machines that devoured culture, unraveling archives and rewriting histories with cold efficiency. On 1,000 worlds, stories teetered on the brink of oblivion. But the Council declared something no one had dared to utter in millennia: a war of remembrance. For the first time in recorded history, species that had hated one another for eons fought side by side, not for territory, not for conquest, but for the right to remember. The battles were unlike any the galaxy had known. Fleets collided in void-lit chaos. But alongside plasma and railguns came something stranger. Starships carried vaults of memory. Holographic theaters projecting stories into void, symbols of defiance glowing against the darkness. Every battle became not just a clash of weapons, but a clash of narratives. The Dominion fought to erase. The galaxy fought to preserve. And at the heart of it all, a human voice carried across encrypted frequencies, across fire and ruin, across silence itself. The storyteller spoke, and the galaxy listened. By the war's third year, entire star systems had been scarred. Silence engines darkened clusters of worlds, while resistance fleets turned wreckage into monuments of defiance. The cost was staggering, but still the voice endured. The Dominion leaders, desperate, made their decree: find the human storyteller and end him, for they had learned the truth too late. Armies could be broken, fleets destroyed, but a story could outlive them all. And so began the hunt for the last human voice.